If there is only one thing you need to learn and understand about Magna Carta 1215, it's this. Magna Carta 1215 is the sole peaceful means known to humankind by which the rights of the weakest, most innocent citizens can prevail over a massive, potentially corrupt and oppressive state power. This is the voice of freedom, Magna Carta 1215 Learning Centre. Welcome to your next lesson with hosts Fitzroy and Carl. Welcome back, folks. Our second lesson for Magna Carta 1215. Fitzroy Sterling joins me again this evening. How are you, Fitz?
I'm doing well, my friend. I'm pleased we're back for a second one, so I'm ready to go and see what we can knock out today.
So we had a lot of really good reaction to lesson one. Thank you to everybody who's joined in. We've got a couple of people who've already logged in to watch us live tonight. So welcome to you folks, and hopefully we can educate you a little bit more about what Magna Carta 1215 and trial by jury is all about. So Fitz, lesson two. Last week we talked all about law. Where do we go to tonight?
So tonight we're moving into rights and defining that. That's going to be really important for people to understand the real nuance of what that means. And then that elaborates into the rule of law a little bit more in depth and the whole monarchy structure, how it truly works. And then it's going to go into government, what it's created for, what it's supposed to do, what it's not supposed to do, who creates law, that kind of stuff. So it's going to cover into that. And then we're going to finish off in a bit of stuff about the police as well versus constables. So it's a pretty rich one tonight.
Yeah, sounds like it's going to be interesting. So do we kick off into our first video?
Yep, let's do it.
Or do we have a statement? All right, we'll get into our first video. Hang on a sec here. I'll just sort my screen out so I can share it a bit. Share that. Push that down. And can you see that all right, mate?
Yep, we're all good to go.
All right, here we go, folks, for a little movie.
All right, so we're going to continue. We left the video off with this police. There's many costumes, call themselves police. And then we're going to discuss a little bit more about the people, and then we're going to get into the head of state and possibly some of the branches of government. We'll see how we go for time. All right, here we go.
Get paid to do.
So you agree with me, but you get paid to do that, so you stand on that side.
I'm trying to talk to you the way I'm talking to you, as opposed
Exactly, because you're doing what you get paid to do, not what you stand in, and that's why I disrespect you.
All right, so just a short little refresher, and then we'll get straight into some of the terms here. So now we're going to go, still finishing off on the people, we're going to go into the term rights. We hear that said a lot. I remember Dan Andrews saying that, you don't get rights. Rights are less important than, this is about your safety, right? It's a famous saying, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, don't quote me, something to do with if you choose safety over your liberties, you'll have neither. And that's self-evident right now. So let's go with what rights are and why you don't have any. According to Dan Andrews, the term rights is rooted in knowledge of natural law. Rights are actions that protect all aspects of one's integrity. So that word integrity, just to give you a better understanding of it, actually comes from the word integer, which is a mathematical term, and an integer is a whole number. So integrity means to be whole, right? And so anything that penetrates that integrity, right, that's a violation of your wholeness. So that can come from, 4 different ways that I know of. One's through the physical realm, spiritual, the mental, and there's one more I'm missing and I can't think of right now. Physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, right? So those 4, they're all ways that your integrity can be penetrated, right? And so rights are the right actions or knowledge of the right actions needed to preserve peace and harmonious coexistence of all life. So when he says that your rights are less important and your safety is more important, that in itself is a contradiction, right? Because what is safety about? Is it not about preservation of peace? Is it not about harmonious coexistence? Well, you can't have that unless your rights are preserved first. There is no safety. And so this is just showing he's running off the ignorance ignorant. People who ignore knowledge are ignorant of the people, which has been made. Been made to be that way. So, he knows. He's a very, very clear understanding of how to manipulate people because he knows they have lack of awareness, and that's why they're easy to manipulate. So we'll go back to that screen where there's the head of state.
So can we pause it there, Carl?
No, I'll just move this one out of the way.
All right. So I just wanted to give a bit more depth to rights. Just because you hear that word, I have a right to freedom of speech, for example. So the thing about that is, if you understand that a right is something that exists, like a gift that's given to you by this planet, I guess, and natural law, that how to live in harmonious coexistence. Well, if you believe you can say whatever you like without considering how that's going to impact someone else's integrity, well, then that's not freedom of speech in the sense of preserving rights. That's a demand for, whatever it is that you believe to be shoved into someone else. And a lot of people confuse the two. They think, oh, I can think whatever I like, or I can do whatever I like. Well, yes, you can. Yet if you don't understand the intention behind it and what it will trigger for someone else's experience and whether it's going to be a violating experience, well, then you're not exercising a right. And a lot of people get confused between, doing whatever they want versus is that a right that they're exercising? And so I just wanted to bring a bit of clarity to that. So just to help out, when people say that word rights, they don't really understand what it really means a lot of the times. So freedom of speech is not the same as preserving rights. If you want to just say whatever you like, and that's where it's never really been drawn. That real clear line has never really been drawn between.
So what you're saying is you don't have a right to say anything you want to say.
If it's going to penetrate somebody's freedoms, then that's not a right. What you're doing, you're insisting on a demand, but it's not actually a right. So it's about understanding the difference between that word right and demand. A lot of people use the word right when they really mean demand, and they can't tell the difference because a right is only something that preserves everyone's integrity. So if whatever you say is not going to be in the preservation of another's integrity, you're not exercising a right. You are exercising a demand, which is a violation. And so just wanted to really, hopefully that helps, where people get confused really easily between doing what they want. And usually that's a belief that they're pushing, not a right. And the two are very separate. So I'm hoping that, I just wanted to give that a little bit of space anyway and just give that a bit more clarity.
Sure. Shall we continue?
On. Yep.
All right, there we go.
And then we'll get into the head of state. So let's just move that there and so I can see it. So we've got the people who are equal to the head of state, right? This is all about what the rule of law is. So who is the head of state? They're still a man or woman. They've just taken a job, I guess it's a job really, to occupy the highest office in the land, right? So the people created a system where they created a government, which is an administrative body, and they need something to be, or someone to be the head of all that, right? To be in charge of administrating that whole function, that whole structure. And so what they do is that head of state needs to take an oath, right? And they need to be someone of high integrity, right? That cannot be compromised. So the people, the whole way it was structured is the people would elect someone they believed to be of that high integrity, they could trust, to actually protect and serve their sovereignty, right? So I explained what sovereignty was. That's pretty much what they're doing, right? Is to protect it. And the head of state, it's like an office that acts as like a vessel which holds the people's sovereignty and it holds their assets, and it actually helps administrate them so that people can have their needs for equity and harmonious, peaceful coexistence. Now, that's what the people agreed to, right? So that's what the role of the head of state is, and that's why they take an oath, and that's called the coronation oath, because we in Australia are under the constitutional monarchy system, right? In America, they're under what's they're called a republic, which their head of state is the president. Well, we have the head of state, which is a monarch, right? And that term is false in itself because they're not a ruler. That's incorrect. They're just an occupier of an office. So as soon as they start throwing those terms like monarch, that's when our consciousness gets subverted and we start believing they have some kind of divine special, rights that were granted to them by whoever that knows better than everyone else, right? So that's how the deception is done. It's done through language because it creates a perception of like a legitimate authority, which they don't actually have. They are someone who can get out of the office just as quickly as they can by the people. And the way they do that is by breaching that coronation oath, right? And in that coronation oath, they actually swear to protect the laws of God, right? And what are the laws of God? They're the same as common law, So that's, the common laws, no loss, create no loss, no harm, keep the peace, and commit no fraud, right? So those 10 laws that are in the commandments, or the 10 commandments, they can be condensed down to that. And so the head of state, their role is to ensure that is always preserved, right? And then they have control over what we call government, right? Which is divided into 3 branches. So here you can see the legislature, which is the Senate and the House of Reps. So I'll see if I can bring up a slide to explain why government was created. So let's see if that's come up. All right. So why was government created? To administrate the will of its creator, which is man, in order to secure and protect the property of man and organise the infrastructure, labour and services necessary for peaceful, dignified coexistence, and to collect and distribute resources equitably for all people to share in and enjoy the abundance of life on this planet, right? How many of us can honestly say that that is our experience of government? I really struggle to find one, right? So even before this COVID stuff hit, you'd have people, talking about how poor government is, right? It's because they never acted within their function. They haven't since we've been alive. People, who are alive today. I'm willing to stake anything on that one. And so that's the actual intended purpose of what government is. And so now we can see just how far from that they have actually moved. All right, so let's get back into that head of state image. We'll move that one. So as you can see, maybe I'll bring up one more of what government can do, actually. I'm going to share that. What can government do? So this just gives a little bit more clarity. Government can create a set of rules termed legislation that govern its behaviour on how it conducts itself, a fiction, right? So they are an artificial body that was created to provide a service, a function. And that was administrating the will of its creator, we the people. Legislation deals with the temporary, so it's only to do with how it carries out its function, which is not permanent, it's temporary. And the thing about government is, in our monarchy, what's it called? I've just lost my thought. In our constitutional monarchy, it actually is written that no government can bind its successor. So all these bits of legislation it creates, no future government that comes after it is actually accountable to that. They can change it, but you notice they never do. Funny about that. So it's there to deal with the temporary. Therefore, it can be amended or repealed. Where law, like we made really clear in the first video, it's something to do with permanent. So anything that's to do with permanent, it cannot be changed. So we cannot change the fact that we feel that how we have an innate sense of justice and injustice. We can't change that. That's just there. That's permanent, right? So laws are to do with that. What governments do is just their function. And now you think about what legislation has been used to do, and it's far exceeded that. It's been used to actually create slaves, and that's what we have today. And that's the sad part of all this, is that how it's all to do with knowledge and how little knowledge people have about who they are, because they've never been taught and they've never been given definitions, and that's been on purpose, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't have good slaves. So maybe we'll go into who actually makes law. Let's go into that. So we can, as far as in the human realm goes, here in the physical realm, who makes law? So it's the people who make law. And it's not through government, but through the trials and tribulations of everyday living, which is permanent, right? So everyday living is permanent. It happened before us, it'll happen after us. The people make law through the conduit of their conscience. That has an innate understanding of the system of dynamics required to live in peaceful and prosperous coexistence. So, same overlapping themes. It's always there. So that law is always to do with how to live peacefully in coexistence with one another, and to prosper. That's the whole reason why we make law, is things that we're going to agree to, that we understand innately, of how we're going to function in a way that's enriching life, not just for ourselves, but for all. So that hits about the 10-minute mark there. So we might just stop it there for now, and we'll carry on with more about the judiciary, and hopefully get some time into the executive as well. So we'll leave it there.
All right, Fitz, that's the end of the first one. So that's been a fairly enlightening, I would have thought, few minutes for people to watch, particularly pertaining to how our rights actually work.
Yeah, so the one about who makes law, that's what a constitution is. That's the law that we agree to live by. And that's shaped by how we've already tried and tested life. And that was only done once, and that was in the 1215 Magna Carta. It hasn't been done since. Like tribes and things, they never wrote it down, they just passed it down in stories. But we actually codified it. And when you codify something, it becomes the supreme code of conduct of the land. And there's nothing more powerful than that. So if people understand that's what a constitution is, it's not something Parliament writes, they'll be able to distinguish between law and legislation. So I'm hoping that gave it a little bit more depth, so they can see what government does is nothing to do with law. Yet majority of people, if you ask them, they'll say, well, law is what government makes. And they're just, that's deliberate. They're not supposed to understand the difference between legislation and law. Otherwise, if they did, this wouldn't be happening. And we would have trial by jury, because the alternative way that we allow something to become law is if government creates legislation and we test it and we find that there's no problem with it, then we allow it to pass, and no one gets prosecuted. It has to come into the trial by jury for breaching any government legislation. It just stays because it's been of no harm to anyone. That's how we also, through trial by jury, allow things to stand. So that's another way that law is allowed. So that's kind of how the Parliament used to do it when they had a lawful monarchy years ago. Don't ask me when, because I know Rome's been involved the whole time. So it's really murky to get a right answer on that one. But there has been little moments here and there where Parliament has passed legislation which has stayed as law because it was actually contributing to the people's protection and the quality of life. And so certain bits of legislation did stick around after the 1215 Magna Carta was sealed. So just thought that might help people understand how that actually works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very, very, very easy point to understand when you put it that way. I'm sorry, you can probably hear that rain outside at the back of my place at the moment. We are getting just flooded like you wouldn't believe, folks. The water in Queensland, I can tell you. Robert Deutsch would be very proud of the predictions he's put out in the last couple of weeks. And we're not going to talk about what might be being washed away by that water, just between you, me, and the gatepost. All right, Fitz, shall we get into our next?
Let's go to the next one. Yeah, for sure.
All right, hang on a second here. I'll share my screen again, and we'll get underway. All right, here we go, and play.
All right, so this one I think is number 4 in the series. So I was going to play a little more of this clip just to refresh the memories of what this is all about, and how it all relates to this situation we're in right now. I think we finished on speaking about a little bit about the head of state, and so we might go into that in a little more detail. Hopefully we'll even cover the police in this one. All right, just a bit more of this, and then we'll get into some more definitions.
That's fine, and I'm still asking you to go home, please.
Yeah, get your paycheck so you and your wife can eat. We won't, but you can eat. So
We're not going home.
I know. We're not going home. We're not listening to your orders anymore.
All right, let's get into what I was going to share next. Can government make law? No. Government is a fiction that does not exist in nature. So to understand law, one needs to exist in nature. So the people who form government, yes, they exist in nature. However, they're not there as a function of existing in nature. They're there as an administrative body to administer the will of the people. So that is not their prescribed role to interpret natural law. That's not what they're there for, right? So it was created as an administrative body, therefore cannot interpret natural law to create law. Government only has the authority to deal with that which is temporary, which is legislation. And the previous one I did cover government and legislation and what legislation is. So hopefully watch that to understand this slide. So if we go back into our little hierarchy there of what the rule of law is and what it looks like. So just want to move that out of the way for a moment. Yeah, so that's the legislature, right? So that's their role and function. So what we might do is we might skip the judiciary for now, because I reckon it'll be better if I get into that later. So we might go into the executive, which is the, actually no, what I'll do is I'll just give some definitions to what a status is and just where people's consciousness is at the moment. So this is what a slave thinks, right? This is where the majority of people's consciousness is right now. And most people without realizing it are statists. You'll see them, all the ones who are wearing the masks and the QR coding, they're following all these directives that believe this is, that's what a good person does. This was a view they hold without realizing they are. One who holds the erroneous belief that there is such a thing as authority vested in certain people, magically giving them the right to rule over other people. This authority means that a certain collective of people who we call government have the moral right to issue commands to those whom they rule, those under their jurisdiction, and that their subjects or slaves have a moral obligation to obey the arbitrary dictates, laws set by their masters. Simply put, a statist believes in the legitimacy of slavery. Now you think about all these arbitrary things that have been popping up about all to do with lockdown and all the restrictions and how they keep changing. I mean, it's right there in your face, right? So without realizing it, the majority of the population can be defined as statists. So we can show you just how far from sovereignty the majority or the collective conscience is. So now I really like this next one about what a statist is, because it just explains exactly what government is, not what we created it to be, but what it is now and has been for hundreds of years, if not thousands. So the brilliant idea, we give a small group of people the right to abduct, imprison, harass, dispossess, and kill people. So we can be protected from people who abduct, harass, dispossess, and kill people. I love that. That says everything, right? That shows you what happens when you live in fear, what you acquiesce and what you allow, what you give permission to, right? So we wouldn't have never allowed ourselves to get into this version of government if there wasn't fear first. All right, so that's why I love that one. That one really explains it really well.
Can we just pause that for a moment?
Into the executive.
Yep. There you go.
So I just wanted to add a little bit more to that. So government can obviously rule the people if they don't have a mechanism in place by which they stay in their box, in their prescribed role. And so everything that's happened now is because that box was removed, and that's trial by jury. So if we had trial by jury, government would have stayed in that prescribed role and never would have stepped out of it. So that's why statism exists, not because it just exists in nature, but because there was nothing to prevent, people with, nefarious intentions from taking up those positions where they are not accountable. And so if that system of accountability existed, those people never would have been attracted to that position. You would have had people of high moral character being attracted to positions of government. But because there was no accountability, which was deliberate and intended, all you had was people with I think one of the favorite words I'm hearing these days is the word narcissist. So you're having people with narcissistic tendencies being drawn into those positions because they know they're not going to be accountable. So that's the difference of how a government gets out of control versus it stays in its prescribed function. And so that's why trial by jury is always going to be brought up on these shows, because it's always at the center of how we go from getting our needs met to being dominated by the very thing we created to serve us.
So this is exactly the reason why 1215, Magna Carta 1215, couldn't be allowed to stand in the eyes of the power at the time, which was the church.
Yes, correct, because that always had intentions of dominating us. That was obvious from the beginning. I mean, that's the whole reason why they invented the different religions. So they needed us to step away from our innate knowledge, our intuition, and our consciousness. They needed to find a way for us to stop using that and react out of fear. And when you react from fear, you're reacting from the brainstem. That's the lizard brain. So you don't function from a place where you can make rational choices. You function from a place of reaction, and it's about kill or be killed. So the choices you're making are nothing to do with long-term objectives. They're just getting out of the problem in the moment. And so if you have a look at what's happened with this COVID stuff, people just went along because they think, oh, what's the quickest way to get out of this problem? Right? We just comply. It'll get better. That's all fear. If we had trial by jury, that would never be the case, because they'd never even dare doing anything that would get us into a position where we're in panic, because the very next thing that would happen is they'd be standing in front of us, having an answer for that. So I just wanted to
run around the world and do what he did. He would have been dragged in front of a trial of 12 good people and made explain himself.
Oh yeah, and that would have been really short.
Yeah, very short. The only thing longer would have been the rope at the outside the court waiting for him, I would have thought.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's the terms they go into, right? Because that whole structure is they have to take an oath for a reason. So that's created that way. So they're not to go outside the boundaries of what it is they're allowed to do. And so they know that, right? So because they've taken an oath, that's why they're accountable. And that's why they can stand before us.
So what you're saying here is government has no accountability. And I'd like to point out to folks who are watching now, we're a couple of days out of our most recent national federal election here in Australia. Happened last weekend, May 21, 2022. And I think you could confidently say that the people have absolutely no trust in government at this stage. So what you're saying is brilliantly exercised in what the Australian people have just been through coming up to this election and now after this election. We have many, many issues with the way the election was conducted. There are going to be thousands upon thousands upon thousands of complaints going in about this, but there is nobody accountable.
That's correct.
There is no. We send these things into a computer at the AEC. We don't know who's on the other end of that computer, and you're likely never to know who was on the other end of that computer and made a pass on or made some sort of decision on your complaint. They may have decided to action it. They probably decided to bin it. That's why we're suggesting if you are complaining about that election, you need to complain at least to 3 agencies: the AEC, the AFP, and Fair Work Australia, because they can't get rid of them all. We're also coordinating a lot of that as well. So the problem is we are getting a great example of how the government is out of control and why or how they've managed to get this far down the track. If we had Magna Carta 1215, we would never be here. Even if it was only introduced in late 2019, nothing of the lockdowns would have happened. None of it. So this is a significant.
I actually reckon you would have found a lot of politicians just leaving if Magna Carta all of a sudden was implemented really fast. Because if they stayed, they wouldn't be far off the noose. That's the thing.
That's right.
So if that was, they'd be scurrying like rats. We'd all of a sudden just have an empty parliament. And pretty much everyone in the department heads, all the people high up in the police, the judiciary, the whole thing, they would have just ran for the hills, because we would have found out pretty quick what on earth they were really doing, and the fact that they breached their oaths.
Is there a parallel? I'm not sure how familiar you are with this. Is there a parallel between the way Magna Carta 1215 and trial by jury works versus a military tribunal?
Yeah, I'm not sure because I've never had been informed of what happens at a military tribunal. I just know the accountability factor is pretty similar. So that's what I don't know if they judge from conscience. That's what I don't know. So I've never been one. But I do know the consequences are pretty much the same for anyone who's in a position of office that breaches it.
So
That
at
is
the
the
moment, some of the intelligence that I'm seeing at least indicates that trials are happening, executions are happening. Now, these happen inside a military court, a military tribunal. The trial usually doesn't last longer than 2 weeks, and sometimes doesn't even last 2 days, because of the overwhelming evidence that's being presented. Now, how do we wake people up to the fact that I think there is a great deal of similarity here, in that the accountability side, um, as you say, working down the list. So at the moment, some of the people that are being trialed and executed are for crimes against humanity, but particularly crimes against children. Now, there are children who have been born into sexual slavery and have been born, if you like, into the dark side and are being used without their permission. They had no choice in the whole matter and all that. Now, the court is choosing to, from what I understand, the military court is choosing to use some degree of leniency for those sorts of people that have been born into sexual slavery, have been, if you like, bred for it. And they're not going to be going as hard on those people who may have been instrumental in attracting a lot more people to the movement. I mean, we're not talking about people who are living underground here. We're talking about big name stars that you know, names that you know who've been born into sexual slavery. One is a very prominent one that you probably know at the moment. She lost a baby recently. There's another whole story behind that, which we'll get to one day. So there are significant things happening. So that leads me to believe that there is a little, and I only mean a little, bit of flexibility in punishment in a military tribunal. Of course, military tribunal always ends in execution as the end result. If you are committing a heinous crime, a crime against humanity, a crime against children, or you are a prolific committer of crime. I don't. I've never been inside a military tribunal, certainly not an Australian one, and I think the closest that anybody has ever really been into a military tribunal that isn't in the military would be, Hollywood, who got us in there at some stage with, A Few Good Men or something like that. So yes, it's difficult to actually see the parallels, but the results do indicate that there is certain parallels. They don't mess around. You're not allowed to use loopholes to get out of the law. Here is how it's presented. You can't make an excuse that somebody else did it, because we'll go and get the somebody else that you point out and we'll put them in the same chair. So I think there is certain parallels running with MC 1215 at the moment, and certainly while there aren't 12 good people, there's only 3 people on a military tribunal, 3 judges who sit on that. But I can see that this may open a path for us in the future. Would you think that's possible?
Yeah, I reckon there's some overlap in the sense that when it comes to oath bearers, people who take oaths, if they've been put on notice by the population, that's how the running list works. So it'll start there. So it'll start with all the ones that have been put on notice will come through the trials first. And those notices are evidence of their compliance to keep doing their job. That means standing outside of their conscience and still, standing outside of law, should I say, not under law, but they are still standing outside of law. And the Constitution was very clear that this is not a fence-sitting game. There's no compromise here. It's very black or white. The people's sovereignty is supreme, and it is not up for negotiation. So if you're an office holder who's taken an oath, you don't mess with this. So that's why the penalties are very extreme, because we can see what's happened, right? Here's the evidence. We don't need to see any further. Like, this is what happens when you don't hold your oath, right? People's lives get destroyed in the worst, hideous ways. And so that's why the end result is the same. It's just the process may be a little different. But I can see the end result is the same because the penalties are pretty extreme. It is the gallows if you're found guilty of treason. It's full asset stripping, just like in the military. They're fully asset stripped. So if you've got children, that's it, because they're the benefactors of crime. They get nothing. So, this just kneecaps that whole passing it down the bloodlines thing. It's gone.
We should point out, we're not throwing children out on the street here and locking their parents up, are we?
No. It's just that they won't inherit those assets. There would be a way that the children would still be taken, but they wouldn't, if someone had acquired say like the foxes or something, like that's gone. You're not going to have that kind of access to those accumulated resources. Not there. They would have an existence for sure, but not the ones that their parents accumulated through crime. That needs to be distributed to the very people who are the victims of it. So that's kind of where it all comes from. So it's like a self-feeding system. With the military, I don't really know what they do with the assets that they take off them. That hasn't been explained to me.
No.
But with the trial by jury, it goes back into the people because we're the ones who they took the assets of by the sheer fact that they committed those crimes. It was our assets.
I'll ask a certain retired lieutenant general that I know that might be able to fill us in on how a military tribunal works. I think that would be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'd love to be part of that too as well. We can carry on if you like, because we're getting into the 36-minute mark.
Let's hit play.
Branch. So just showing that slide again. So here it is here, the police and the prisons. So that's called the executive because they execute what other parts of the government arms, decide on. So let's look into what a police constable is, shall we? Okay, so here's the definition of what a police constable is. A man or woman acting in the role of independent holder of the office of constable must take an oath to serve and protect the sovereignty. Remember, I did go back into that really clearly, I think in the second one, of the people by upholding the law, not the legislation, not the legal system. That's got nothing to do with law. Those two are mind control constructs, which you can see I pretty much showed you with legislation, and the legal system is the same. They're all contract driven. That's all to do with a fictional invention in the mind of how to control people. That gives the illusion of authority and the illusion of jurisdiction. That's the thing, right? And you can see, if you watch the legal system, if you really pay attention, you can see how it's there to conceal crime, not to actually prevent it. But you really need to have your eyes open to see how it's done. So by upholding the law of the land, which is our law of the land is the common law, right? So the common law is do no harm, create no loss, commit no fraud, and keep the peace, right? So that is what a law officer is. An office holder of the law is someone who just upholds that, nothing else. All these other things that have been placed on them, it even says it in the Victoria Police Act, right? They've got other duties placed on them that are subordinate to common law, right? So that should never have happened if we're having a proper system of governance. But that's where we are now. In order to have legitimate authority that only the people grant. So because authority is a fiction, it's invented, only the people can grant it. And so they can grant it on the conditions that they set, right? And so that is the conditions they've set right there. And you go back to the behaviour of those people in those uniforms and those costumes where they're heavily armed, that are carrying weapons that can actually take life, right? You think about how serious that is to hold that weapon, right? And the only reason they were given that weapon was to protect the people's sovereignty by upholding the actual law, not the legal, not the legislation, but that's what the grant was given, to do that, right? Because sometimes you might need to use deadly force to do it. So that is what was granted. Now you have a look at what they're actually doing, right? And what they're being paid to do. So even that, you watch him and he says it in his consciousness, he goes, he doesn't want to be here doing this, but he has to. Even in his language, I have to, like he doesn't have a choice. So they're teaching them, they've got themselves believing they don't have a choice, that they're absent of choice here. And it's their life, like somehow their life is separate to everyone else's. There's a separation. So here, in my life, this is what I can do right now. Like there's nothing else I can do other than be an enforcer of slavery. That's how I can survive. Like you think about how far bent that is from reality, right? How someone comes to accept that. Is that a man who's speaking because he understands that he's sovereign? Or is that a man who's speaking because he believes he's a slave? Like, it's pretty much telling you right there where he's at. So now I'm going to bring up the dictionary's definition of what a police constable is, right? Because that's what all they are. Regardless of what their title is, they're all constables, even the police commissioner. A constable has independent authority to exercise his or her office. Remember, they're office holder of constable. A constable cannot be directed by government or senior police as to who he or she should prosecute. We don't see much of that, do we? All right. So they all say, "Oh, I'm doing my job. I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing what I'm told." Like, they've got to follow orders. So already in breach of their actual oath. A constable's duty to enforce the law, not the legal, not legislation, is a personal responsibility. That's really big, that personal responsibility. So they have personal responsibility upon their actions. So if they ever come stand in front of the people, they're not going to be able to say, "I was just doing my job," and that the people are going to say, "Oh, no worries. Now that you're doing your job, just forget about it and you go home." Because it's even there stated, as to what the grant of authority, on what conditions it's come from, as to how they get the authority by the people. And the constable is answerable only to law, right? So what the law, 4 tenets of law? Create no loss, commit no harm, or do no harm, keep the peace, and commit no fraud. Like, I don't know about you guys, but all I see is all 4 of those are breached with that video that I've been showing you. So they're not there to follow his or her senior officer's directions. They are not bound to do that, right? So that means that they're doing it by choice. That means it's a conscious choice to do that, right? So they're so not even protected in any way, shape, or form for the performance of that duty, right? So that is what an actual police constable is. Now, do you honestly believe that these police constables are taught that? If they were teaching them that, they'd be functioning entirely differently. Wouldn't even be close to what they're doing now. But obviously, they go out of their way to teach them the legal system is the law, And these guys, they don't want to actually use their conscience. So there's a particular kind of individual that is drawn to want to be a police constable, and that's, my guess is someone who will act out of conscience. That they don't have that real integrity in their conscience. Now, what do I want to share? I want to share this. Back to that original slide. So, as you can see, we've gone from natural law to what the rule of law is, to the people, to the artificial organisation that's created to serve man, and officers that have taken oaths. So I'm just going to pause for a moment because I'm going to get some other slides ready.
All right.
So
that ends it for that one.
I'll get us back up here again. There you go.
So yeah, the critical part of this is understanding that the police, which are meant to be constables, are at the centre of whether we do have 1215 Magna Carta or we don't. And they are the actual obstacle that's standing in the way. And so as we get more knowledgeable, there will come a time where the bulk of the population understands this knowledge, and they will be left to make a choice, to choose to do their actual job, which they were given the grant of authority by the people to do, or to keep following orders. And the people who follow orders are doing the bidding of the slave masters, and they won't be able to get away with it once the bulk of the people can see that they are the actual, I guess, enforcement arm of human trafficking. And when people really not understand that, that pressure is going to be so immense that they won't be able to hide anymore. And that's this kind of knowledge is what we need to get to on a collective scale, where it's undeniable and it sits in our fibers and it can never be knocked out, ever. So that's kind of what I'm really wanting to put a bit more effort on the police. So I think I've given some slides to you there, Carl. So if you wanted to bring up the next one.
Okay, let me have a second here, and we'll bring up the first one. There. Oops, I beg your pardon. Try that.
So here it says, under the British Commonwealth Constitution, the people are prosecutors of acts of injustice committed against them. not third parties like police are today. Taking the right to prosecute and control of the claim away from the aggrieved is an act of treason. So you can't have the very people whose job it is to bring people to justice to prosecute justice. They can't be in two functions. So I just really wanted to make that clear for people to be able to see what's actually happening today when they have those police prosecutors. And if you've gone in any court, you'll watch them. They cut deals all the time. Now, you would never do that. You would never cut a deal if it was you being your own prosecutor. That would just never happen. So they're showing you how this whole thing works. You know, it's got nothing to do with justice at all. You never cut corners on your own, you know, all the violations that happen to you and just start blowing a few off here and there. I can't think of anyone who'd want to do that. They'd want the full system to, you know, understand every aspect of what has happened to them and how deeply they've been violated, so the jury can actually see, you know, just how bad the pain is that they're carrying now because of the violation. Not to sort of just dismiss a few because they, you know, don't fit certain qualifications. You know, that's the system that we're running today. So anyone who's a police prosecutor, right, they're committing a massive act of treason. And that all needs to be looked at. Because as an individual man or woman, you know, they are standing outside of their own conscience. And everything's about your conscience. It always relates back to natural law and the fact that we have a conscience to understand the conditions required for us to live in peace and harmonious coexistence. And the police are not part of that. They're part of the opposite. They're part of how we are trafficked. And they're the enforcers of it. So if we can move to the next one, it'll show the highlight between what a police officer is and an actual constable. So in case people don't know, I just wanted to go through these parts as well. The Office of Constable is created to keep the peace and gets its grant of authority from the people to protect the people's sovereignty. So there's that word again. By upholding the law, remember the law is the conditions and the traditions, and the customs the people agree to live by. That's what they're there to do, to uphold that. As created by the people through the, here I go, I'm repeating myself, through the customs, traditions, and rules they already live by, which was codified, so that's the supreme code of conduct of the land, in a sealed document called the Constitution, which is the 1215 Magna Carta. So probably go to the next slide there, Carl. So, whoops. A constable must fully know natural law. Now, could you imagine that? Because they look at you now when you say that word and their eyes glaze over. And it's just like, zzz, nothing, right? They must know natural law and common law of the land. That's like a prerequisite before you'd ever be considered to be someone who'd be a constable. Now, that's how far away we are from anything close to a constable. They can only be elected by the people from within their community. So if you look at it now, they get privately recruited, these police, and they don't stay in the place that they grew up in. They move them somewhere else. And that's a deliberate tactic for a reason. Because no one from your own community is ever going to turn on you. And are only answerable to their chief constable and the people, but never government. Now, I've had it said to me by an actual police officer that he's paid by the government, so he does what the government tells him. He's actually said it to me in my face. And I couldn't believe that. Because a constable can only operate within the jurisdiction of natural law and common law of the land. Now, that is so far removed. And you see, there's always reoccurring themes here. And it's got to do with law, not legal, not legislation, but law. And that is that which we innately understand exists in nature. And that is what the constable's role is, to protect and preserve. That's actually a highly honourable position. And I can't see too many people who see the police as being an honourable role. And that's because it's nothing close to what it was meant to be. I think there's a couple more on this one, Carl. The constable has higher standing, I don't know how many people know this, than politicians, judges, magistrates, barristers, and solicitors, because they have the grant of authority to enter any court to ensure everyone within that court is acting within the law of the land, and arrest any magistrate, judge, barrister, etc., acting beyond what the law of the land allows. Could you imagine? Have a think about that one. How many of those people would be left standing if they were doing their actual job?
They'd be cleaning the courts out quickly.
Yeah, that'd be pretty empty, wouldn't it? We'd have pretty empty courts. We wouldn't have anyone in politics, and there'd be no lawyers. They'd be all gone. Same with the barristers. So that's how fast things would change if they were actually doing their job, as prescribed by what we agreed to give them a grant of authority to do. That's just a level of ignorance that the population is carrying because it was hidden on purpose. Because if it wasn't, the whole structure would be entirely different.
Yep.
So I think there's another one. One more I think there is.
Sure is, yep.
So this is about, like, I'm thinking about Shane Patton. He's the Victorian one. You know, in your state, you'd have your own commissioner. That's what a chief constable is. That's a commissioner is just a chief constable.
Yep.
So a proper chief constable of constabulary is not someone promoted from within the constabulary. Now, sit with that for a while. A true chief constable of constabulary was someone fully knowledgeable of the law of the land and common law. They were of high standing within his shire, so for us it's our community, and was fully independent of government during peacetime. Now, could you really get a look at that and compare it with your chief commissioner? How did they get to their position? Really have to think about that. They are total inversions. And so I think I've got one more slide.
You do.
So we're going to look at this one to show you who the police actually are, and they'll show you in their symbology. So at the top you have the St. Edward's crown. That's the one with the dip in it. So that's pretty much telling you they're agents of the Vatican. Then you've got the wreath, and that's what you'll see around all the UN stuff. Anything that's got a UN, UNICEF, obviously the UN, UNESCO, they all have this wreath. You can see the all caps name, and there's an ABN. Anyone can look that up. You just go to ABN, you look up your own police department in your own state. And then obviously the big one is the inverted pentagram. So anyone who knows anything about the inverted pentagram, that's telling you more than you probably want to know. That they have satanic rituals that they do, which we just don't know. So that shows you who they actually are. They're agents of a foreign corporation that are there to collect. Now, if anyone wants to go onto Dun and Bradstreet, they do credit reports on all the companies. You can type in your local police, your state police, and you'll see how much money they made for the year. When I typed in Victoria Police, it was over 2-point-something billion US dollars. So you can see just how much of a lucrative operation they're running. And when they come and stop you at the road, or they're, stopping you to get your name and address, every time they stop you and they get your details, they are dipping into something that you don't know about, and they're generating money for that entire structure. So their job is just to keep activating that cash cow, and you're it. And there's so many of us that don't even know that. And the whole structure is just made to keep going, keep taking. They're just running a banking structure, and they're administrating us like we're just, units of currency. And they're just moving us around from place to place, making sure that we pay up. That's the role of the police. And that's why it's going to be really difficult for, I don't know how many police are going to be actually able to escape a trial by jury structure. I'm really struggling to think how they can, because they can't not know. If they've got a conscience, there'd be things they're doing that would be not sitting well with them, that they'd be ignoring. So it's not like they wouldn't know, but they find a way to push it down, and so they can keep carrying on and having their job, so they can get their pension, so they can get their paycheck. They're not thinking about how their actions are bringing back karmic debts to not only them, but to everyone that they live around and with, and who they do things to. They're not actually conscious of that the fact that they're enslaving the very people they're here to protect is having karmic consequences for them as well. Why do you think a lot of them are alcoholics? You've got to really think about that.
Yep, they are.
A lot of them are alcoholics. So it's not just the ugly things they see, it's the things they do where they step outside their conscience. It's two parts to it. And if we had trial by jury, the crimes would be nowhere near as bad as what they are. because people would get their needs for equity met. So when people have got their needs for equity met, they rarely commit crimes. It's just not common. Because if you're getting all the needs that you require to live a dignified life, if they're available for you, why would you? You know, so the whole role would be different. You wouldn't have these militarized police that we have now with the full military assault weapons and the flak jackets, you know, and the tasers and the pepper spray. Like, how extreme is that? That's like Roman centurions. You really think about that. That's just another version of the Roman centurions. They should just come around and you know, shake you down, enforce what, you know, their bosses tell them. And anyone who's an order follower, like that there, is one of the most dangerous positions you can take up. Because if you, what's the word I'm trying to say, pass off responsibility to the fact that it's not you making the decision, if you do that, you become one of the most dangerous people on the planet, because that's you agreeing to be a robot. Well, robots don't have a conscience. You know, so you can't say you don't understand the consequences of what you're doing and pretend that that's true. Like, they do know, but they're choosing to ignore it and push it down. You know, I've actually asked plenty of police, are they standing under their oath of office of constable? And I've never had any, not one has ever said yes. They've actually gone quiet and silent and refused to answer. But they have the word constable written on their badge and they won't say a word. So that's telling me they all know to some level of what they're doing has got nothing to do with the role that they swore an oath to. And even in that oath, it even says to Her Majesty the Queen that they swear an oath to the Majesty of the Queen. Well, Her Majesty the Queen swears an oath to protect the people. So indirectly in that oath, it actually says that they're serving the people through that hierarchy structure that we have of the highest office holder in the land, you know, being answerable to the people. So that just shows how little they are taught about the true nature of a constable, so they can still keep working for this foreign corporation and be their policy enforcers. And that's their entire role. And that's why we're here, because the mass of people don't know. They think they're a legitimate force, and they're not. So I just wanted to really give that a lot of depth, because they're the reason why we don't have the capacity to actually have trial by jury. They're stopping it.
I find this particular section one of the most interesting because it is, of course, one of the most damaging to us. We can't find a way through to fight them yet. They don't seem to have a conscience, as you say. Their paycheck is more important to them than making sure that our rights as human beings are being looked after. And obviously, they're bowing down to their slave masters and revenue raising as much as possible. What did you say? Over $2 billion the Victorian government raised last year.
That was just the Victoria Police, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Victoria Police. Yeah, that's stunning. I'd be interested to learn what Queensland made, but our fines are slightly less, or at least they were. Recently, all the fines have been doubled or tripled, so they'll be more in line with Victoria and New South Wales now. And that seems to be the standardisation that's happening across the country. I don't know about Western Australia. I think they're pretty exy over there too. So, a very interesting evening, Fitz. So clearly we're going to need to play a little bit more time on the constable role, because the more people we can make aware of the constable role and try and bring those people acting as police into understanding of what the constable role is meant to be, might help us a little bit.
Yeah, so the beautiful thing about the 1215 Magna Carta is there is a notice process where you do actually serve it on police by mail. And then after that, there's a process by which you actually go in face-to-face with three of you, and you record sending them a different type of notice where they're obliged to give you a crime number and investigate. And so there's a lot of power. And if we're doing it in small numbers, not so much. But if we're doing it at every single police station across the country, that's when it has power, because they can't pretend they don't know, you know, if it's happening at every one. And that's what we're missing, is we're missing that coordinated effort. So they don't care that you know the truth. What they worry about and what frightens them in their sleep is the fact that we're going to organize ourselves around the truth. And until we act, until we have the courage to start acting off from the truth, they still have the power. And it's just that simple. And there's no silver bullet here. It requires every single one of us to stand up in our power, understand this knowledge, and use that as our guide for clear direction on how we're going to work as a collective to regain that which we were born to always enjoy. And that is our freedom.
Absolutely. It's another great lesson. We've got just a couple of questions. Somebody threw up, is this information coming from a Black's Law dictionary? I posted back up. Black's Law is actually part of the fiction. So you won't hear too much of us talking about Black's Law here unless we're bagging it. I think that'd be the best way to describe that, wouldn't it, Fitz?
Yeah. Well, that's legal. Illegal, anyone who understands what legal is, a legal definition of legal is the undoing of God's law. So definitely won't be talking about that here unless it is to explain what the Black's Law dictionary is there to do. And it's
so the same user, I think, wanted to know where the statements and definitions were coming from. So have a look at our first lesson. You'll find a lot of information about where we source this information in that too. And if you go across to my Nun2K, NUNN, the number 2K YouTube site, and have a look back through some of the other Magna Carta videos that you'll find there. You'll have to go back there. I don't know. There's probably, I don't know how many videos in there now. You probably have to go back a little way to find some of those, but you'll find plenty of information about where we get this information from, and looking forward to hearing more of it. Will there be a systematic step-by-step process for notices, Fitz? The short answer, I'm sure, is yes.
Yes, that's correct. There is. There's a very straightforward process. It's not that much to it. It just requires you to pay a little bit of close attention, get some support, and away you go. And it's all just underway. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's a template pretty much, and you just have to fill in some parts that you edit. But you are required to take it.
Is language important in the notices? You have to write clearly. You have to language. You'll find other things on our websites. Words mean things, folks, and I can't begin to tell you how important it is that you learn and understand that. We think words mean one thing. They have changed the meaning in law to those words. We think they mean one thing. When they talk about those words, using those words in a court, they usually mean about exactly the opposite. So words mean things. Language is important. So do we need to be careful about the language used on the notices?
No, because it's been done for you. So the man who wrote the notices, David Robinson, he was really well educated. He educated himself on how the legalese system works and the lawful way to speak. And he actually puts it in the beginning. He writes, these words mean what they say. They are not under any legalese definition. So he states it from the beginning that this is the expressed meaning of English, not the legalese version. So he clears that up for you. But then he uses Old English words in there as well, so they can never, ever be confused as legalese, because legalese doesn't use Old English words. So he was very clever in how he structured them. So they're quite well done. Like they're quite ingenious, actually. So that he's made them watertight, so the criminals can't get out of it. It just requires the weight of numbers. Once the weight of numbers does this, it's a total different ballgame. And that's what we need to do. We need to build that momentum so we can always get into that space where we have our courage now and we're willing to act on it instead of staying in this apathetic role. We're all too good at that. Now it's time to step out of that and start behaving in a way that's going to be in service of that which you seek. Because you cannot manifest it in your mind. It needs to be action.
And of course, we've got to try and get more people to understand this, Fitz. So if you're watching tonight, share this with somebody. The more people that know about it is where the power comes from. They've kept it hidden from us, and that's why we're so weak. So the more people that learn about Magna Carta 1215, learn about constables, learn about Article 61, eventually, by sheer weight of numbers, we will walk over the opposition. And it will be a bloody mess when we walk over them, trust it. But it's all about knowledge, and we have to have as many people as possible understand that knowledge. And of course, you can't just walk up and be on a trial by jury. You need to be in alignment with thoughts, words, and deeds before you can sit in judgment of others. So there is a fair bit of education required to become a juror in a trial by jury as well. I don't think we're overstating that either, are we?
No, that's correct. There is a fair bit of knowledge different to anything you've ever seen on television. about how a trial by jury will be run through a system of equity, because we are in the end trying to discern the difference between intent and action and consequence. So we need to understand that, have a really solid understanding of what all that means before we can actually get into that position and start assessing someone else, because they are our neighbor, people who come before us. Office holders, they're different, right? They were given a responsibility, and if they've shirked their responsibility, that's a whole different kettle of fish, and that's pretty much who those notices are for, because we can't have them treating us as their subordinates. That's not how the structure was designed. But the other thing I did want to say is that the thing about law is, the way law works is that you need to know about it before you can use it. But once you know about it, it's undeniable, so it can't be defeated. That's why it's called law, because it's permanent. The legislation is entirely different. That can be defeated any day of the week, because that's what criminals do to hide their crimes. They create legislation because we don't have trial by jury to stop them from doing that. Where law is something that's permanent, that we agree to, and it's undeniable. So if you just got to learn about it and find it to access it and then action it, that's the difference.
Yeah, exactly right. I'd like to apologise to folks tonight. We normally have a few more people in the room, but because my Nun2K site got shut down yesterday, we've had to relocate to a few other sites. So we do apologise if we're jumping around on the web for you. See, Julie's just found us. Julie, congratulations. You found us just in time to say goodbye. It's been a pleasure. I'm very excited to see where we're going next week. Tell me about lesson number 3.
I'm pretty sure we're going to go a little bit further past the police into more government understanding. So it'll be a little more depth into what we've done today, because this is, when you're learning this for the first time, it sounds all great, but it needs to be repeated before it starts to really sink in. So there will be a little bit of repeat and overlap, because that's really necessary for that long-term knowledge to stick around in your gut in a way that it can't be knocked out again. Because every bit of information you get in your day life is going to be opposing what you're learning here. So sometimes it's important to reaffirm that, because otherwise you're sort of just back into what you know from what the criminal structure is teaching you. So we might do a little bit of repetition and a little bit more depth to move past that.
Yeah. I'm going to upload this. Well, this video will be able to be viewed as soon as we end the broadcast. It'll load up on the channel that you're watching it on now. I'm also going to load this video and others up to Project Matilda. Now, if you're not aware of Project Matilda yet, it's an Australian-owned business. It is Australian-designed, and it is 100% secure. It is not going to be turned off by any big company that owns servers, because the guy that designed, built, and wrote every piece of code in it also owns the servers. So it is a censorship-free area. I don't mean that you'll be able to come on that sort of channel and speak about pedophiles in a good way, or talk about how wonderful it is to kill people. It is a free speech platform, but there are certain rules to it. We, on the other hand, will not get taken off for mentioning things like Donald Trump's election or non-election or various other bits and pieces, and we will avoid the censorship of future, and hopefully you won't have to go chasing us around the web to try and find us. So projectmatilda.com is the website. It's free to register. It looks a lot like Gab. It's sort of based on that. The young fellow who runs it all is an extremely clever young man, and I'm sure you'll be very impressed with the site. He also has a TV version of the site called tv.projectmatilda.com, and there is an app coming soon too. So you will shortly find a lot of our stuff will start streaming direct to Project Matilda. If we are allowed back on YouTube, we will also try and stream direct to YouTube as well, but we'll just see what happens. But Project Matilda will eventually become the home of most of what I'm doing, particularly with the Voice of Freedom. I will try and put it up on all the other platforms. Obviously, Facebook and Twitter and whatnot will still keep running. But YouTube can be problematic, even if just to have a slip of the tongue. So don't want to be bothered with them too much. If you happen to know anybody that was subscribed to Nun2K, please subscribe to this new channel. Like and subscribe. The Aussie Cossack will kill me if I don't say that. And, well, Fitz, not really our spot to talk about it, but a little bit of an update on the Aussie Cossack. He's still inside, obviously. He is unjabbed, so they are keeping him in segregation at the moment. And he will not be allowed to mix with general population until he is jabbed. That could mean 6 weeks in solitary confinement for the Aussie Cossack. That's the latest news up to date on there. So, Fitz, thanks again. Looking forward to next week when we dive a little deeper into the old book.
Yep, I can't wait. So I'm pleased the people that have showed up have got questions, so that tells us that they're engaged. So I'm really pleased to see you guys putting your questions up there, guys. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. There was a tiny sign on the foot of the computer that the senior constable was using a fine that read, "Use your discretion. It's not worth your job." Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. So, yeah, police do have discretion. They rarely choose to use it, has been my experience, particularly of late. They used to use it a lot. I remember not long after I got my driver's license, I drove through a little town not far from the little town that I lived in. It was an 80-kilometre-an-hour zone, and I must have gone through it a bit over 80. The policeman chased me, pulled me over, didn't fine me, didn't threaten me, just took me out and kicked me in the bum. Literally, kicked me in the bum. Today, somebody would say, "Oh, that's assault. You've got to have him." But I never sped through that town again, I've got to tell you. He had a fairly decent-sized foot. And he knew how to use it. So all right, mate. Well, looking forward to having you back next week again. It's going to be wonderful. You're wondering how they define the word discretion. Oh, okay, Susan. Fitz, do you have a definition for discretion?
I would have to say, from my understanding of how they do it, they leave things very ambiguous so they can squeeze out of stuff. They don't do it so it's watertight. So I would say it'd be open to interpretation just from what I've seen them do and how they act. So I don't believe they'd have a clear, distinct definition by what we've been doing here tonight. Not even close.
Yeah, absolutely true. All right, mate. Thanks again for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it. It's a huge amount of effort that you put into these programs, and I'm sure the people who are watching and asking questions are just as interested in it as I am. Please, folks, like and subscribe, share this video around to your friends. Make sure you try and, if you've got somebody who thinks they might like a legal career, you've got a young person in your life who's eyeing off the law in the future, get them in to sit with us for a while. We might be able to give them a real future in real law, because it all starts with the young. It's all well and good to educate us oldies, but if we don't educate the young, nothing is going to change. So please, folks, if you can like, subscribe, share, tell your friends, because nothing's going to change until the bulk of us understand this very, very important, well, I was going to say news. It's not news. It's just very important information about the way that we protect, save, and prolong our lives and maintain our sovereignty. Fitz, thanks again. Really appreciate your time.
All right, it's my pleasure again, and I look forward to next week.
Cheers.
Bye now.
This is the voice of freedom. We are not one voice. We are many. We are your voice. But we can only be effective if you use your voice. Your voice. This is the voice of freedom. We will not hide from the truth. We will ask the hard questions until we are sure we have the truth. Welcome to the voice of freedom, where your voice will never be silenced.